Hello and welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor and your Alta Live producer and host. Welcome. It takes a second for our audience to fill in. So while that happens, it's my exciting job to welcome you all to today's discussion with Bethany C. Morrow. Bethany is an indie best-selling author who is here to discuss her latest novel, Cherish Farrah. She'll be in conversation with Anita Felicelli. Anita is editor of our monthly California book club, and she reviewed Cherish Farrah for Alta's weekly Monday book review newsletter, which we really encourage you to sign up for. It's a free Monday newsletter. Every Monday, a new book review in your inbox. So we'll have links to all of that. Some brief housekeeping, if I may, as I welcome you. Alta Journal is a quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We are really proud of what we do. We do weekly events like this. Again, Anita edits our monthly California book club. In fact, tomorrow night, we're welcoming Karen Tay Yamashita to discuss iHotel. So we'll send you a link to that as well. If you like what we do here today, I so hope you will check out our magazine. In fact, we've got an Alta Live membership discount for you, which I'll include a link to as well. Anita and Bethany will chat for about 30 minutes. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions you have of Bethany about her work, either Cherish Farrah or her other books. Again, they'll chat for about 30 minutes and get to as many questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. We're also going to shoot you an email with a link to this video, a link to buy Cherish Farrah, a link to Anita's review, invitations to other events, etc. We do like to get the chat started by asking everyone to let us know where they are zooming in from today. So please do that. Before I turn it over to Anita, I'm here in Novato, California, north of San Francisco. Please let us know where you are. Anita and Bethany, fill us in as well. And with that, Anita, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Beth. Excited to be here with you, Bethany. I'm in Mountain View.
I am on the, someone's here from Sacramento. That's my hometown. I am here on the border of Quebec and New York.
It's so great to have you here. And I enjoyed your book so much, as you already know from the review and what we were talking about earlier. So it's a kind of an amazing book. When it starts, we're at the point of view of a very extreme, calculating kind of schemer, but who's surprisingly sympathetic, Farrah. She's just complex, and she's a Black teenager in a white country club type neighborhood or community. Her parents are losing their homes, so she moves in with her best friend, Cherish, who's also Black but adopted by white, liberal, rich parents. When we start the novel, she has sort of the intensity that a lot of girls have in their friendships when they're teenagers, but she also kind of wants or longs for the life of her best friend, Cherish. And there's something interesting to me in that she almost wants to fuse with Cherish, kind of make their doubleness singular. And that kind of drives us forward. I was so curious throughout as to what was going to happen. And even though we start with these kind of and deranged intensity about Cherish, wanting to be like Cherish, Farrah's sort of shrewd take on social dynamics, we pretty quickly start to wonder if things aren't maybe quite what they seem at the start. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the origin story behind this novel.
Yeah, so the place that I see it differently is that Farrah doesn't experience jealousy, and because she has a budding psychopathy, but because she's a 17-year-old, I think that some readers will have a difficult time letting go of certain expectations of her. So they will read her sort of deranged fixation on Cherish as wanting Cherish's life, when really she's very upfront about the fact that she wants control. And control is also about ownership. And she has used Cherish as, well, as she says, she's cosplaying a teenage girl, right? She's pretending to be a normal teenage girl. And the way that she learned to do that was through watching Cherish. She says, I don't remember where in the story, but she says at some point in the story that she watched Cherish and she saw how Cherish responded to things, and she learned to create a mask to match Cherish's demeanor so that she would, be able to go along undetected, basically, not just in their community, but in society as a whole. So the backstory for the story is kind of disconnected from that. There's an aspect of it where it's like, okay, here's a germ of a story that I've decided to write. But by the time you get to a book, by the time you even get to a complete draft, it is so far removed or so many evolutions past it that I would not be able to tell you like, oh, here's when I decided to do such and such. The story in a lot of ways organically just keeps growing and keeps expanding outward, just as their characterization did. Farrah was Farrah herself immediately in my mind, which was very troubling because it wasn't the original sort of point of the story. I started from the end, as I think a lot of people who write a thriller probably start because they know the reveal or the twist. So I started from the twist. And when I was first writing it, I kept trying to make Farrah just a regular teenager and have her motivations and have her needs and everything be normal. And she really resisted that. And she continuously responded in a very strange way and continuously interpreted, because it's from, she's our POV character. She continuously kept translating things that you're watching happen in a way that was like, is that what I just saw? Or is she like, is this a her thing or is this a me thing? Is she misrepresenting it? Does she know that she's seeing it differently, or that there's some sort of process that it's going through where she's seeing things a certain way? She is extremely calculating, and so she projects onto everybody that everybody is doing this. Everybody approaches life this way, which really just comes from a myopia of not being able to recognize other people's perspectives, except for, let's say, Cherish. She knows that Cherish isn't capable of doing what she's doing, but otherwise, all of that happened not just organically, but I guess it happened mentally, because as I was writing, I kept being surprised at Farrah, at the way that the story was, the way that the story was sort of concealing itself. The story that I set out to write, which has to do with the reveal, Farrah kept sort of concealing it by her behavior, which of course is a good thing for a thriller, but it was very alarming because it became obvious to me very quickly that she was not a teenage girl, except sort of biologically.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through. I think in another interview, you talked about that your agent had mentioned Get Out and said, "Oh, would you be willing to to write something similar to this?" And at first you said no, and then you went ahead. But I thought there was another point I don't remember if it was the same interview, but about Chris Washington, who's the protagonist in Get Out. He's kind of a little bit of a blank slate. He's a little bit like of an everyman almost. And there's nothing, twisted about him at all. And so I was really interested in the fact that you then with Farrah, she's so complex and complicated and very like human, but psychopathic. I thought that was, kind of an interesting thing. Like, it sounds like that was a process of accrual, that maybe she didn't start out quite as complex, but she just started gathering.
No, she started out that way. I just had a very strange writing experience, because while I was writing her, was being like, why are you like this? And it's not that I didn't want her to be complex. I simply had to accept that she was more than complex, that there was something actually wrong with her. But my agent texted me and said she would be really interested in seeing something in the vein of Get Out. And I personally am contrarian by nature. And I also just don't like, I don't know who sets out to be derivative. And that's not what a comp is, but the way that comps tend to in our industry, a lot of times, instead of going after something, they come before it and therefore flatten it because everybody's looking for the next thing. And typically it's not necessarily something that anybody has interrogated. What are the what is the work that this work is doing, and what are the elements of this work, what are the facets of this, what makes this actually happen, and what is the social commentary taking place. So I was like, of course I would do it based on what Get Out actually is and what it actually is accomplishing, which the longer you talk about Get Out with people, the more you realize that you apparently didn't watch the same movie. So I as soon as I told her no, I got the phrase in my head, which is the twist, so I can't repeat it. And I knew exactly that was the vehicle to do that kind of social commentary and that sort of social horror. I also know that I'm never interested, again, in any sort of like replication or repetition of something. So when I talk about Chris, the main character of Get Out, I talk about the way that it's used in something that's like the first of its kind. It's not the first social horror, but the first cultural reset experience that it really turned out to be. One of the ways that you get that sort of incisive commentary, and that commentary on not just white supremacy, but white liberalism, the illusion of white liberalism, is by having this main character that you know that the society hasn't prepared itself to be sympathetic toward. We don't see Black men as being vulnerable. And when I say we, I clearly am being extremely generous and talking about the society. Obviously, I have a very different experience as a Black American woman, but the way to override the audience's anti-Blackness that is just inborn in this, it's airborne in this culture, is to really strip him of any sort of personality. There's really no aspect of him that you can criticize because you don't know anything about him. And that also means that you don't suspect him. So all of that foreboding that you feel when you're experiencing it, you know, has to be coming from something else. It can't be coming from him. I, again, am contrarian by nature. And also, I'm not interested in giving people the easy way out. I'm not interested in having repeat conversations. I'm always interested in moving the needle. I'm always interested in indicting the American imagination and actually progressing our culture because I don't understand the point of doing anything else. So I was never going to write a blank slate character. Farrah was never going to be a blank slate. She was never going to be somebody that you didn't have to do the work of interrogating your misogynoir, which is that specific misogyny that's directed toward Black women. Making her palatable would have been basically giving the audience a pass in that airborne misogyny, in that anti-Blackness, in that not making them do any work to come and enjoy the story. And the point of social horror to me is that it requires an awareness of the oppression, of the systemic racism, of the prejudices that impact our society, because it's happening in your world. It's taking place with the same mirrored sort of institutions and institutional oppression. So I didn't have any interest in excusing the audience who are part of that exact same culture, who are part of that exact same society, in order to say something really incisive about the society. So it was really a challenge intentionally to the audience itself. Can you understand that two things can be true at one time? If something's really obviously wrong with Farrah, does that mean nothing's happening to Farrah? And what does that require of us to, especially in terms of the narratives we're used to, the narrative shapes that we're used to and have been indoctrinated with? This book is meant to be, especially because it's from her perspective, constantly challenging that, which can make for an exhausting or disorienting read, but that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I found it actually exhilarating rather than disorienting. I just hadn't seen that on the page before. And I mean, there's just so many astute remarks. I liked, some of her comments on tokenism. And I was just curious, like, how much was writing those social observations a process of discovery? Like something happens in the plot and then you imagine what Farrah would think of that. And how much of it was like, in part of the initial design. You mentioned like, how it had changed and you weren't sure how each thing of that, was affected by your process. But
yeah, no, the commentary that happens in social horror exists before the social horror because it's just a fact of reality. It's just telling the truth. any novel that tells the truth, you're just finding ways to reasonably tell the truth within the story and the confines of the characters that you are creating or that are being created, to put it in passive voice, because a lot of times it's like, I don't know where she came from. But there wasn't, when you know that you're writing social horror, there are certain things that you always know, and it's reality. You know that you're dealing with reality, whether it's heightened, of course, and it's a very extreme example. And then the sad thing is, like, I don't know if these things are extreme, because I don't know everything everybody's doing all the time, and I see what actually is being done. So in my experience and what I historically know, it's not really that extreme. But I knew, of course, I know the world that I live in. So in that case, I, of course, understand the world of this book immediately. It was really just having never written anyone like Farrah before, just being constantly like, you're just going to keep being like this, aren't you? This is great. Like, she was just she's a very unrelenting personality type. Of course, as a lot of people, as you would be, I think, if you had this very sort of like the strength of conviction that comes from this psychopathy. But the actual action that took place, again, I don't know, from project to project, I don't know which comes first here. It's kind of, to me, it's a feedback loop constantly of the world growing, and then the character revelation, and then the world revelation, and then the character development, and it all is sort of happening together. So I don't write in such a way that you can, like, okay, let me untangle these webs and tell you exactly these things independent of each other, because I think, to me, I don't know if other people do this, so I'm sure they do, but to me, these things can't be separated because they're never separate. That process is never separate for me. I'm not braiding something together so much as I'm scaffolding. So it's not something I can talk about piecemeal.
Yeah, I hear you. And that uncanniness sort of the atmosphere, it's a real intensification. I haven't read your YA novels in between, but with Mem, there's also a little bit of an uncanniness, but in this one, it's, very intense. Like, what did that feel like, while you're working on it? Because you work on it, on a novel for so long, and you stay in this headspace. Like, do you develop an affection for Farrah, or do you?
Oh, well, I mean,
I
love Farrah. She's hands down probably my favorite character. She can't be anything but herself, and I like that about her. She's not inconsistent at all. But I usually I draft probably for 4 to 6 weeks or something. So I'm not writing probably for that long, but when I'm writing, I'm only writing one thing. I know that other people can, like, do different things at different times. And this, honestly, what was interesting about this book, this for the first time was something that I had written probably about 50,000 words, just straight out, not really with any sort of direction. It was much more pantsed than a lot of my other work. And I also stopped and wrote a whole book in between, which was So Many Beginnings. And then I came back to it, therefore, like, months and months later, and then had to read it to see what it was before I could start writing it again. And actually, I think that by that time we had already sold it. So I also knew that I wanted it to be something different than anybody else in the process of having sold it had seen. And so I wanted to lean in as far as I possibly could to whoever Farrah had shown herself to be. Because at that point I had gone, if you know anything about So Many Beginnings, it's a historical remix of Little Women. It takes place in 1863 on a free people's colony in Roanoke Island. And so it's a very, very, very different book. It's very heavy with familial love and sisterhood and growth and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just a totally different voice, totally different tone. And so when I came back to it, it probably was even more disturbing to me because I had just written So Many Beginnings. So I had to read this 50,000 words before I could start writing it again. And I was like, okay, she's what I thought she was. Like, she's a special person. But I thought she is the story before you get to the story. And so I thought it was really wonderful that she herself would be a kind of she herself would be a distraction for people who think that they know what's happening in the story. It's I think it's because of how strong of a character Farrah is and how strong her conviction that she knows what's going on is.
Right. She ends up being a little bit unreliable, but it's more that she truly believes. And so we're convinced along with her. And then that's almost why, we have the rug pulled out from underneath us partway through, challenging our kind of expectations as a reader.
Yeah, I think that whenever people ask me about unreliable, every single narrator is unreliable because every human is unreliable. The question for me is whether they're malicious or not, which strangely, despite who Farrah is, she's not maliciously unreliable. She is very myopic and she's very convinced and convicted of her narrative. And so since she's the one presenting it to you, but I always think it's interesting which characters we say are unreliable. Like there are some characters that are just always telling you the God's honest truth, like factual recollection. Anybody who tells you a memory of something is telling you their interpretation on top of their memory. So that's of course unreliable. But we don't characterize most narrators as being unreliable, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think something that I thought was interesting was this backstory of she convinces, when they're younger, she convinces Cherish to play a game with nails. And we later find out that Cherish's parents have one version of this story, but Farrah is guarding, these other things that happen. But I thought what was interesting was that Cherish never reveals it. She has the same sort of symbiotic.
Cherish and Farrah are keeping the other, well, the true recollection of that scene.
Right. And then the Whitmans sort of encourage their friendship purportedly because they believe this story. But as it goes on, I wondered how much they really believed, or, if there was maybe a more uneasiness there for them.
I think they absolutely believed it, because the narrative that they have of that game, which, by the way, I was saying on Twitter the other day, there are two scenes in this that you could consider semi-autobiographical, and that is one of them. The playing the game with the upturned nails on the side of a house that's being renovated. That I used to do that. And so when they're playing this game, inevitably one of them ends up crash landing and the nail goes through their foot, and the person that happens to is Cherish. And so Cherish, of course, wants Farrah to go and get her father, and Farrah is really scared because this is when they're much younger. Farrah's really scared because she doesn't want Cherish being taken away from her. And as you know, they're the only two Black children in this community. But it's also, as we learn, Farrah's been learning from Cherish and changing to adapt to fit with Cherish's demeanor. And so she doesn't want to go get the father because she doesn't want him to know that this was Farrah's idea, and for him to decide that it's actually better if Cherish has friends that look more like him, that look more like his family. And so she steps on a nail too to show Cherish that it's not that bad. The only problem is the Whitmans believe that she did it because she couldn't stand seeing Cherish in pain, and so she wanted to share in her pain. And so that is why the Whitmans just headlong, throw themselves and Cherish into this relationship even deeper with Farrah, because they believe that she harmed herself because it hurt her to see Cherish harmed. And that's not obviously what happened.
Yeah. And their symbiosis, I thought it was slightly doubled, but maybe I'm misinterpreting, with Tariq and Kelly, who are these boys that have an interest in Cherish. And I wondered, is that doubleness sort of intentional, or is that more, that's just how it ended up working out? Like these characters kind of appeared, in this organic way as you were writing the plot, or?
Tariq did, but Kelly, it becomes an attempt at, it's almost like an intentional uncanny valley. So you have these this two sets of friends, one of whom is a transracial adoptee, which is a Black child who's been adopted by extremely wealthy white parents, and the second friend who is also a Black child, but is not, is from a Black home. In Farrah's case, she's much closer to their world. She lived in their world. She and her family were a part of that community. Kelly is a very, very different situation because Tariq was adopted by Judge Leslie Campbell, who's a judge in family court or juvenile court. And so Kelly was brought before the judge, and he was on his way to juvenile hall, and Judge Campbell sort of took him, first of all, gave him the sentence that a white American kid would get for the same thing, as opposed to what typically happens, of course, which is the intentional over-criminalization and predation on Black youth. And so Kelly is more unofficially adopted, has grown up more unofficially adopted in the Campbell home than, say, Farrah has in the Whitman home. But Kelly also is a very, very different type of person because he's coming from entirely outside of this world, completely outside of this community. And he's not cunning, as far as we're hearing all of this from Farrah, remember, but he's not as cunning and intelligent as Farrah. And so he's not doing the work of wearing a mask or creating a mask. So it looks at first as though this is like, oh, this is a sort of mirror friendships. But of course, the characters themselves are not the same. So to me, the reason it's fun for me is because people are always looking for similarities. And sometimes they're really not there. And sometimes if you take a glance at something, it's like, oh yeah, there's sameness there. And to me, that's so premature to hurdle over all of the differences in order to be like, okay, I'm just sociologically interested in the fact that we're always trying to override and overwrite very obvious differences, as though we believe there's something inherently good about sameness and about similarness and stuff, even when it's not there, that we'll fabricate it. So that's just more of something that's interesting to me that I'm kind of like poking at, because I don't like personally being misrepresented. So this was the kind of project where I'm sort of airing out all of my frustration with the oversimplification and the flattening that we do. Number one, because it doesn't serve a good purpose. And number two, because it usually helps to keep things as they are. And so anything that bothers me, I just went ahead and messed with.
And you messed with it beautifully. It was so fun to read and so absorbing. So I think it might be time for Beth to come back if there are questions from the audience. But
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I turned my light off. Thanks, Anita and Bethany. Jessica asks, other than Get Out, were there other books, movies, or stories, works of fiction that you found yourself looking at or thinking about while you were writing Cherish Farrah?
Not while I was writing, and I didn't think of the story of Get Out. I thought of the work that Get Out was doing, but my original comps, since now comps are public facing for some reason, my original comps for it were Single White Female meets We Need to Talk About Kevin. So those, after I had written it, was like, okay, this is what I would comp this to.
Got it. An email question. I'm curious about the significance of the title, the two girls' names next to each other, plus the double entendre of cherish being a verb and making the title a command. How did that choice get made?
It was always my working title. This has never changed. I actually, a lot of times you expect to at least have a conversation with the publisher wherein they might suggest changing the title, and they were like, nope. We like it. We want to keep it. And for me, and I love that the asker refers to it as a command, because to me, I think of it as a threat.
Interesting.
Very much that to me, the book is very much like Cherish Farrah or else. So.
Last question. What's next for you? What are you working on now?
I am not working actively on something. I know what I'm going to work on, but I released 3 books in 9 months. So I'm not going to release anything else for a minute. I've been saying like, eat what's on the table. In June, I released the follow-up to my best-selling contemporary fantasy YA. It's called A Song Below Water, but the follow-up is called A Chorus Rises. And then in September, I released my Little Women remix, which is historical fiction. It's also YA. It's called So Many Beginnings. And then, of course, in February, I released Cherish Farrah. So you can understand that I am not actively preparing to release anything else.
Got it. Well, we will, for our audience, we will grab links to those books as well and add them to our email to you following this in our post. So if you want to catch up on all of the Bethany C. Morrow collection, fill your library with her books. We will make it very easy for you to do so. Before I thank our guests, I'd like to invite everyone to next week's Alta Live, where we are going to discuss 3 pioneering California women whose histories you don't know, but we'll get to learn about next Wednesday. They are under-celebrated California women who we will be celebrating next Wednesday. In honor of Women's History Month, we get 1 month, so I guess we'll learn about some women for that. I am so, and of course, tomorrow we will welcome at the California Book Club, Karente Yamashita, discussing her iconic classic California work, I Hotel. That's at 5 p.m. tomorrow evening. We'll send links to all of this, as well as a link to buy Cherish Farrah. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us. Anita, always so great to have you at Alta Live. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. Stay safe.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Anita.
Oh, thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Beth.
Take care all. Bye.